Today we are going to start with this topic of rights, and this is something that you have heard even before you probably thought of studying the subject of right. We talk about this word all the time. The word right could mean many different things. Okay, so when we studied all the normative theories, the moral philosophies in the previous semester, we talked about what is the right thing to do. Okay, so we struggled with defining what is right. Okay, so what is right? We can look at that question from a normative perspective, and that's something that we have partially, not wholly, partially we have done in the previous semester. Okay, what is the right thing to do? But when we talk about right this semester in conceptual jurisprudence, our approach to looking at that would be a little different. So conventionally, normally we think of right in terms of, right being opposite to wrong. Okay, so right is what you morally ought to do, and wrong is what you morally ought not to do. So you have moral philosophies that require you to do something, so that's the right thing to do. And then there are more. Then your moral philosophy might tell you, moral propositions might tell you that you ought not to do something, and if you do that, you're committing a wrong. So yeah, that's how we understand the word right and wrong from a very conventional lay people's perspective. So that's one way of looking at what right means. Okay, but then there is another way of looking at the same word. Okay, we talk about rights in terms of entitlement, in terms of freedom. Okay, so listen to these words very carefully. We talk about rights in terms of entitlements, in terms of freedoms. Okay, so when you say that I have a right, you lay your claim to something. Okay, so whatever it is. Okay, I'm not referring to any object. Okay, whatever it is that you may say that, well, I have a right to be paid rupees 20 by someone. So you're saying that you have a right. You also say that I have a right to freedom. Okay, I have a right to free speech. Okay, so you're saying that. Okay, you're saying that that's a right. You may talk about a million other things. Okay, or that you may have right to. So when you say that you have a right in that sense, okay, as opposed to what we just discussed, okay, you're saying that you are entitled to something, or you are saying that you have some freedom to do something. So when you say that I have a right to free speech, so there you're focusing more on the freedom aspect, that you choose to do or not to do something. Okay, that so you have a right to certain freedom. Okay, so you have a choice in doing something or not doing something. Okay, now if you say that, well, that freedom is a matter of right, then others have a duty to not interfere with respect to that freedom you just talked about. The same goes for entitlements. When you say that I'm entitled to be given something, okay, whatever it is, okay, then someone else has a duty to ensure that you get it. Okay, so these are two broad ways that we understand rights. Okay, so yeah, rights could refer to some entitlements, so certain claims that you make. Okay, I'm entitled to health care. I have a right to health care. Well, I have a right to education. So you are saying I'm entitled to be, provided with education. You say that I have you can think of anything. You can say that I have right to shelter. Okay, so that would mean that, well, you're making claims about shelter, so someone has to provide you with shelter. You say that I have a right to food, so you're making claims about having food. Then someone has to fulfill that claim that you're making, so someone has a duty to provide you with food. So those are entitlements. Okay, that's there. And the other aspect of it would be freedoms, okay, which you can also interchangeably use with liberties. When you say that, well, I have a right to freedom, okay, you're saying that you have a choice in doing or not doing something. Okay, the choice is yours. But when you say that you have a right to that, that means that others have a duty not to interfere with your exercising that choice. Okay, Now, don't get confused. We are just beginning. So we are going to go into details of that when we look at some detailed analysis of rights. But I hope you understood the two different senses in which we have used the word right. Okay, the first sense is essentially about what's the right thing to do, okay, what's, and as opposed to what is wrong. Okay, so it's a very moral way of looking at it, at something. Then the other is little more conceptual, okay, in the sense that when you say that you have a right to something, you're claiming that you have some entitlement or you have some freedom or liberty. Okay, now this second way of looking at this idea of rights could also be of two different kinds. One could be legal right, one could be moral right. So your claims which are based on some moral proposition, okay, certain moral position, those rights will be considered as moral rights, okay. And your claims, okay, your entitlements or liberties or freedoms that you claim, okay, based on some law, okay, if it is based on some law, then we call it as legal right. So if law provides you with certain entitlements, so suppose there is a law that says that free education to everyone up to the age of 14, okay, then you have a legal right to education. Okay, now suppose there's a moral proposition that says that, well, you ought to take care of your elders. So suppose you ought to take care of your aging parents. Okay, so suppose we do not have a law that guarantees that, but it can nonetheless exist. Okay, so there's a proposition that says that we ought to take care of our parents. Okay, so then you can say that the parents have a moral right that the children take care of them. Okay, so it is possible that in some legal system this is recognized as a legal right, okay, but it's not necessary that it is recognized as a legal right, but then it would nonetheless be a moral right. Okay, so we will go into all those distinctions later on, but I just hope that you understood the this broader idea of rights as I was trying to explain to you. So am I clear to you guys so far? Am I making sense here?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Any doubts?
Yes, sir.
I mean, you have any other way of looking at what is right? Anyway, so yeah, so I hope it is clear to you. Now, later on, as we proceed with our discussions, later on we would go into specifics of these concepts. Okay, but for now, I'm just going to introduce you guys to certain concepts that we are going to deal with throughout. Okay, now when we talk about rights, okay, rights come with duties. Okay, right come with duties. It does not make sense for us to talk about rights without the idea of duties. So when someone says that someone has right, someone else has a duty. So it does not make sense to talk about rights if someone else doesn't have a duty. So whether it is legal duty or moral duty, whatever it is, we can talk about rights if someone else has a duty. Okay, so and then we just said that rights mean that you claim that you are entitled to something, or you claim that you have certain liberties, certain freedoms. Okay, you have certain freedoms, certain liberties. Okay, but this wouldn't make sense, okay, if someone else doesn't have to do or abstain from doing with respect to this entitlements and these freedoms that you're talking about. Okay, so these two go together. When we talk about rights, we cannot talk about rights without duties. But if you can think of any right, okay, which is a right, okay, although there are no duties associated with it, then that would be a very good jurisprudential topic for you to work on. So you are very much welcome to work on this topic. But the understanding is that when we talk about rights, rights go with duties. We say that Wesley Newcomb Hopefield, a jurist, would say that rights and duties are correlated. Okay, so if person A has a right, that means person B has a duty. Or, if A has a right, I should not say just persons, okay? If A has a right, then B has a duty. It makes sense to say that A has a right if B has a duty. Now, as I said, it is a legal right if the duty is based on some law, okay, and it is a moral right if the duty that we are talking about here is based on certain moral proposition, okay. Now, yes, class আছে 12:30 তো no 12:30 তো হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ so yes, rights and duties are related, okay, and they are not to be, they are not opposites. Don't think about rights and duties as opposites. No, duties are not opposite to that of rights, okay, they are correlated. If A has right, okay, if person of inherence is A, okay, and A has rights, then someone else has duty, okay, whoever it is, okay. If A has a right, then B has duty. Now, duty, as I told you, duties could arise either from law, okay. The law says that, this is what one is entitled to, okay, then it is a legal right, so it imposes a legal duty upon someone. But if it is based on certain moral proposition, then the right would be moral right and the duty would be moral duty. Now, duty, what does that mean? Okay, so duty requires that you either do something or you do not do something, okay. Understand it like this, okay. Duty means that duty requires that you either do something or you do not do something, okay. So as I told you, it could be the law that says that, you have to do this or you do not have to do this, or it could be the certain moral proposition, okay, certain principles of morality, certain standards of morality that says that you ought to do this or you ought not to do this. Now, the idea of duty is like within the larger philosophical discussion, domain of discussion on deontology, okay. Now, what the hell is deontology? It's not required for you much, but nonetheless, you should know about this, okay? Deontological approach to looking at duty is as opposed to consequentialist, philosophy, okay? What does it mean? It says that, well, there are certain things that you objectively, that are objectively right, okay? And that it imposes certain duty, okay, which are objectively true. You do not have to do any hedonistic calculus to come to those conclusions. So one of the most important moral philosophers from that particular school, that particular way of looking at duty would be Immanuel Kant. And if you remember his categorical imperatives, I don't know if we discussed this in the last class. It was not part of your syllabus either, but then he talks about categorical imperatives, okay, that imposes certain duties, okay, and those duties are objective, okay. No questions to be asked, no further questions are to be asked, okay. So we are to respect other humans. It's not because respecting humans increases happiness or increases some good. No, not that. It is objective requirement, okay. It's objectively true that we respect other humans, okay. So something like that, okay. So within moral philosophy, okay, duty comes under this under this study of deontology, okay. Now, deontology essentially deals with what's the right, what you should objectively rightly do, okay. So that's what moral philosophers deal with. But when it comes to legal right, we need not go into all that. But when I say that, well, legal duty and moral duty do not are to be studied separately, do I mean that they have no connection whatsoever? Well, no. As you study later on, as you look at different specific cases of rights, you will see that quite often the moral force behind a right, okay, the moral force behind a right, behind a duty, okay, does contribute a lot to its legal force as well. Okay, so yeah, so conceptual jurists, okay, would like to tell you that we are to keep them separate, but you will see that it plays a lot of role. Okay, so from, sometimes judges, okay, even though it is not explicitly laid down anywhere that someone has certain duties, okay, legal duties, okay, judges, while they interpret the law, while they apply the law, might consider certain moral philosophies, okay, certain moral propositions, and then say, based, derive from that you also have a legal duty to do something. Okay, so when we study, we say that, well, we look at these two, separately, but in practice, you will see that they overlap to a great extent. Okay, so for example, when the law prohibits you from committing murder, okay, you can say that I have a right not to be killed, or I have a right not to be harmed. Okay, clearly it's from law, so you can say that, well, it's a, or for that matter, when your constitution talks about right to life, you can say that, well, you have a right to life because the law says so. But at the same time, you know that, well, this is a right not just because, it is there in the law books, but it is something that also certain moral standards, moral principles, moral propositions require. Okay. Now, debate goes with respect to that. Okay. Whether, if the law, for example, says that the said right could be taken away from you, okay, would it be justifiable on the part of the state to legally take it away? Now, we have to revert back to the jurisprudential discussion on that, but you also have case laws that you're going to study on this question, especially in the case of ADM Jabalpur, where extremely positivistic approach was taken, and then it was said that if there is a procedure which lays down regarding how your such rights can be taken away, okay, then it can be taken away, and there is no constraint that the constitution itself can impose on those who on the authorities who are taking it away from you. So those are there. Okay, so why am I talking about all this? Not directly related. All that I'm trying to convey here is this, that yes, when we study, we say that, well, legal rights are separate from moral rights, but in practice you will see that to a great extent the moral force of a right does play a part. Okay, moral force of a right does play a part in whether it is recognized as a legal right or not. Okay, so that's very important for us. So yeah, so are you guys with me before I proceed? I'm talking about a lot of things, so I just don't want you guys to get confused.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, yes.
Sir, you just mentioned that if A has a right, then B has a duty. Sir, if A has a right, then A itself has a duty also.
Can you explain me with an illustration, maybe? I'd like to.
Sir, if we have a right to, a clean environment, then we also have a duty that we do not throw litter around.
You use the word we, which is not of much help for us to understand the concept. Got the idea?
Okay, sir. Yes,
okay,
sir. Yes,
got
sir.
the idea? So
yes, sir,
we obviously we say that we use it generally. How we use it generally, that yeah, we humans have a right, okay? That, but then like against who? Against everyone else. So it does not really make sense to talk about rights in that sense. Now, for example, you say that you as a citizen of this country, okay, saying that, well, I have a right to clean environment, okay, then against who are you claiming this? Okay, so maybe you are claiming it as against the state. So state is up to something that violates that right, as you were saying. Okay, let's say that, well, that right can be derived from your right to life under Article 21, okay, which in fact has happened. So in that case, you are making that claim as against someone. Got the idea? So it just does not make sense to say that I have a right as against myself. Well, I mean, just imagine, okay, if I say that I have a right as against myself, what am I really saying when I say that?
Sir, I'm sorry, sir, but I don't know.
Yeah, so when I'm asking the question, it's not to put you guys in a difficult situation. All I'm saying is that it does not really make much sense. Well, if I think that I should do something, I ought to do something, I might as well do that. Okay, it doesn't make sense if you look at it from a legal perspective to say that, well, I be compelled to do something for myself. But the idea, I have to be two different entities for that to be possible. It just does not make sense. You can talk about it generally that humans have rights, okay, as against who? So you can talk about it generally, but if we are to understand it as a concept, it just does not make much sense. So if examples could be taken, okay, to tell you that, well, that's how it works. So for example, if I have a right that I am paid rupees 20, then maybe B has a duty to pay that rupees 20. If I have a right to education, for example, under a particular law, then the state has the duty to ensure that I get that education. So if I have a right that I have access to certain healthcare facilities, then the state is under the duty to provide me with that healthcare facilities. And it is in this context that it makes sense for us to talk in terms of right. That I say that I have a right. When I say I have a right, as I told you earlier, I'm making a claim with respect to certain entitlement. I'm saying that I'm entitled to healthcare. I'm saying that I'm entitled to education. Well, entitled as against whom? It doesn't make sense to say that I'm entitled as against myself. Okay, conceptually I'm talking about. Generally we use all these ideas, but in lay sense, many things are said without thinking about them seriously. Now in this situation, you see that when I say I have a right, I'm claiming that as against someone else. Okay. Now it's not necessary that only the states states action will infringe. Okay, there could be private entities whose actions could also infringe your rights. Then you can initiate a claim if you're talking legally as against that private entity as well. But I hope you understood. For us to talk about rights, there has to be someone who has a duty, okay? And that duty cannot be inherent in you only. Because if that's the case, then how can law really help you? It just does not make sense. So you can say that, well, I promise to pay myself rupees 20 on Sunday, okay, afternoon. Well, you have a duty to pay yourself rupees 20 Sunday afternoon. You may or may not do that. And for that, what can we really do? I mean, it just does not make much sense for, as to, what happens if you fail or, it's just you promise yourself and you fail to keep your promise, just like that, okay? It just does not make sense for us, conceptually at least, to say that, well, I have a right as against myself. I think I received one more question here. Okay, so if I talk about someone else's rights, then the duty, well, well, here's the thing. You may talk about someone else's right, okay, without the duty falling upon yourself. So you may say that, well, person B has a right that she is, paid some amount of money by person C. Then person C has a duty. Got the idea? So whenever you talk about right, it is not necessary that the duty has to be on you. If A has a right, then B has a duty. Okay? If A has a right, then C has a duty. If A has a right, then D has a duty. All that I'm trying to say here is that if one person has right, another person has duty. But then there are others who might say that, well, many say that, people are becoming too individualistic. They only claim things as a matter of right without doing their duty. Well, that's a different sense in which, that is used. Okay, so some societies are duty oriented. Okay, especially if you look at societies which are based on certain communist or socialist ideas. Okay, their understanding is that do not claim anything as your own, do your bit. Okay, so that approach is there. Okay, but even in that system, okay, if we were to talk about rights, we have to talk in terms of rights being inherent in one and the duties inherent in another. Okay, so I hope I made sense here. Was I clear? I think I have one more question. If A has right to life, will there always exist a moral duty of B even if no legal duty. Well, this depends on the moral proposition. Well, most moral proposition and that most moral philosophies, moral philosophies, okay, philosophers would agree that, well, we have a right to life. Okay, what does that mean? That someone else has a duty not to take away my life, not to kill me, to simplify it. So yes, it does not matter. So this is, in fact, if you remember, John Locke, then John Finnis, all these legal philosophers. Okay, so remember, one of the objective goods for John Finnis was life. So you remember, objective goods are not themselves moral propositions, but you can talk in terms of you can derive moral propositions from those objective goods. So if life is an objective good, how can we talk about a moral proposition? We ought not to take someone's life. Okay, it's just like that. And if you look at philosophers like John Locke, you would say that your life is your natural right. Okay, so it's by nature gives us that particular right. Or you can look at Immanuel Kant, and his categorical imperative would require that we respect human beings. Okay, so that would mean that we cannot kill them. Okay, so whichever moral proposition philosophy you talk about, okay, it does not matter whether that right has been recognized by the law or not. Okay, the moral proposition, the moral philosophy, in all likelihood, recognize your right to life. Okay, now forget about legality. Okay, within the domestic limits. Okay, so you have Universal Declaration of Human Rights that clearly recognize your right to life. Now, whether Universal Declaration of Human Rights has legal force or not, well, see, here's the thing. Well, it depends on how international laws are adopted within the domestic, within the municipal laws. But nonetheless, whether it is directly accepted or not, nonetheless, it is now assumed that life has to be respected. Okay, right to life has to be respected, and this is given. So it's very difficult for us to imagine a legal system in which there will be blatant, open disrespect for this right. Okay, so yeah. That's what I was in fact trying to tell you, that there are certain rights which are so sanctimonious, so morally imperative that they are respected, that they have to also be legally respected. But conceptually, at least at the conceptual level, you can keep them separate. So did I make sense? Was I clear? Are you guys there? Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So any difficulties? Okay. So we'll go into all those discussions later on, but for now I hope you understood what this is all about. So duty, as I was telling you, you can look at it from deontological philosophy. Okay, so that would when we talk about deontological philosophy, we essentially attribute it to Immanuel Kant, as opposed to consequentialists like Bentham and all that. That says that, well, morally, okay, from moral perspective, your duties are objectively required. It is objectively required that you ought to do or ought not to do something. Okay, but we can look at duty from the legal perspective. Well, where then legal duty arises from? Well, if the law says that you have to do something, then that's where the duty arises from. We do not need to then go into moral philosophies. But then, as I told you, those duties quite often are because they are extremely morally imperative that they are respected. So that's what I was struggling to explain to you. So yeah, that's there. Now, duty quite often is interchangeably used with another word known as obligation. Now, obligation and duty for lay people can be interchangeably used, but when we study conceptual jurisprudence, we have to make a distinction between these two. Okay, so what's the distinction? So obligation is defined as proprietary right in personam in conceptual jurisprudence. Okay, proprietary right in personam. So it has to be proprietary in nature. It's not personal in nature. I have not made this distinction, but I will later on. It is proprietary in nature. and it is in personam. So the right here and the duty here are not in rem but in personam. So we'll discuss that later on, but for now just keep this in mind. Okay, in conceptual jurisprudence we make this distinction between duty and obligation. What is that? Well, obligation is one kind of duty, but not all duties are obligations. Okay, obligations. So what is obligation? So obligation would be an obligation would be a proprietary right in personam. Okay, that's how we understand it in conceptual jurisprudence. But then we quite often use it in our lay use. We use the word obligation in the sense that it means the same thing as duty, but that's different. Now, I hope this is clear. Okay, so we'll discuss about this in greater detail when we take up specific topics later on. I already told you that rights and duties are correlated. They are not to be taken as separate and as opposites. Okay, if rights exist, then duties have to be there. Okay, if duty does not exist, it just does not make sense to talk about rights. Okay, so if a person has a right to something, then someone else has a duty with respect to that right. Okay, towards it. Okay, so yeah. Now. Let me see what. Now coming to how do we define right? Okay, I'm not going to define right as of now from a moral perspective because we already did that in the last semester. Okay, as of now, I'm going to look at the idea of right from conceptual perspective. Okay, so when I say that I have a right, what do I really mean? So how do I define this concept of rights? Okay, so it is said, okay, so conceptual definition is difficult for us to make. Okay, now how do we then talk about rights? Okay, well, we use the word interest, okay, to define the content of the word rights. Okay, so rights quite often are defined in terms of interest. Okay, so I have an interest that my life is protected. I have an interest in getting nutritious food. I have an interest that I get a good education. I have an interest in your mobile phone. I have an interest in all the money that you have in your bank account. Do you see a difference between the different kinds of interests that I just talked about just now? I said that rights are defined in terms of interests. Then I gave you examples of different kinds of interests. Do you see some difference in those different kinds of interests, that I just mentioned? Do you guys notice anything? Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
So I'll give you the examples again. Okay, listen to them carefully. I said that I have an interest that my life is protected. I have an interest that I'm provided nutritious food. I have an interest that I get basic education. I have an interest in the money that you have in your pocket. I have an interest that I get your newly bought mobile phone. I have an interest that the state provides me with good education. So I gave you examples of different interests that I might have. Do you see a difference in the different interests that I just talked about?
Yes, sir.
What is that?
Yes, sir. So actually, I see these interests, sir, arranged in a hierarchical order in the priority shelves of interests.
Okay.
So some are more, sir, sacrosanct.
Mm-hmm.
And sir, it is in resonance with rights. For
Okay.
example, I have an interest that no one should kill me. So, sir, it is in tune with that I have a right that I may not be killed. But sir, I have an interest that all your money, sir, be mine. So, sir, I don't think that it is in tune with rights. That's all.
Okay. Anyone else? You notice anything else? Others? It's okay to be wrong. No problem.
Yes, sir. So, in some of the rights, there could be a legal duty.
Some rights would have legal duty, others won't.
Would be legally enforceable, legally enforceable.
Others
for
are
example,
not.
My life needs to be protected and be legally enforced, but I have a right to, I have an interest in your phone, cannot be.
Okay, so wonderful. Both of you have noticed what I was talking about, and others probably, did the same thing. Okay, so you see that rights are to be defined in terms of interests. Okay, so both of you have pointed out some very interesting, aspects of this idea of rights. Okay, so when I talk about rights, I say that there are certain interests which are protected. Okay, but this is not the only way of looking at right. There is another way. We will deal with that later on. Okay, but generally this is how we understand. Rights are defined in terms of interest. When I say I have right, I'm saying that I have interest in something. So Harsh has rightly pointed out that not every interest is legally protected. Not every interest is legally protected. You have right with respect to only those interests which are legally protected. Okay. Now, another important thing that Sumit has pointed out is this, that there is also some kind of hierarchy here. Okay. Some interests are so important. Okay. They are so necessary that they are protected. Whereas there are certain others which need not receive the same amount of protection as those of others. Okay, so yeah, these two things have to be kept in mind. Now, for a legalistic approach of looking at this idea of right, we need what Harsh has just said. Okay, that rights consists of only those interests. Okay, rights are to be defined in terms of only those interests which are legally protected. Okay, very nice way of defining rights. But at the same time, it is possible that there are certain interests which are not legally recognized. Okay, yet. Okay, but they may have such moral urgency. Okay, that they have to be recognized legally. Okay, so this is a struggle that you will see in many different discourses. Okay, so yeah, so both of you have made very important remarks here. So rights are determined in terms of interest. Okay, if you look at it legally, it's those interests which are protected legally. Okay, but then there are certain interests which are of such moral urgency that it is assumed that it is required that they are protected as a matter of rights. So as I told you, we define rights in terms of interests, but rights and interests are not the same thing. So as you guys have rightly pointed out, I may have an interest in the phone that you have recently bought, but it is not necessary that I have a right in that. So not every interest will be protected by the law. Now, it's not that simple a discussion because there's a lot that goes into it. Okay, we cannot possibly get rid of moral discussion, but for the sake of brevity, we have to restrict ourselves to just this. But anyway, we are past our allotted time. You probably have another class, so I'll stop it here and we'll carry on with this discussion in the next class.